In Thailand, you can get an endless supply of the latest computer software, nearly all of it pirated. Halfway across the world in Brazil, different marketplace, same story. Street vendors openly selling pirated DVDs and software from makeshift tarpaulin stalls. Software piracy is so common that the vendors barely take any notice of the police patrols. As soon as they've turned the corner, they set their stalls up again. Supply meets demand in countries where the average office worker would have to work for more than a month to be able to legally afford basic software. The World Summit for the Information Society in Tunisia, a global meeting of key decision makers in IT or information technology from around the globe, promoting their wares, exchanging ideas, and trying to change the world. They have one thing in common with the software pirates. For just as the pirates are illegally making software affordable, the UN Secretary-General and many of the delegates here also want to make the software affordable for the digitally deprived, but legally. Technological visionary Nicholas Negroponte's $100 laptop aims to put affordable computing technology in the hands of millions of schoolchildren in the most needed parts of the world. And the software that's going to be used on this?
We've chosen free and open software because it's better and because it means that the children can actually participate in making the software even better over time. We believe completely in community-developed software as well as content.
Free and open source software, or FOSS, is the latest phenomena in computing and is causing turbulence in the proprietary or commercial software world. Widely used software, such as Thunderbird and OpenOffice, can be downloaded legally and used by anyone without having to pay for it. Over 90% of all the world's desktop and laptop computers run on proprietary software, such as Apple or Microsoft sells. Do they see open source as a threat?
I think the challenge it presents to Microsoft is it just reminds us that customers do have choice. And that when you're reminded that customers have choice, and we always need to be reminded of that, it reminds them that they have to go back to work, you have to listen to your customers. You have to invest the $6 billion of R&D that we'll invest this year in ways that are going to meet the needs of those customers.
So is open source the bridge for the now famous digital divide? Will innovations such as the $100 computer working on free, unlicensed software bring 1 billion extra users online? In the Codebreakers, we find out if open source is all it's cracked up to be. And can it be the bridge for the digital divide?
One can consider open source software a lot like generic drugs. The analogy fits. In the case of open source software, it's a lot less expensive. And for that reason, it's essentially the same product. It does the same thing on a computer, but it costs less.
There are estimated to be over 100,000 open source projects being developed. Not 1 cent was paid by the computer users who have downloaded 50 million copies of the Firefox browser from the internet. It was developed from Netscape by the non-profit Mozilla Foundation. It now has a 20% share of the European and a 14% share of the US market. Apache, the open source web server software, is used by more than 60% of all websites on the internet, including web giants Google and Amazon. So is a revolution underway? Are the days of proprietary software numbered? And now that software has become free and open, will the digital chasm between the poor and rich be closed? Only middle-aged academics will remember that more than 2 decades ago, when computers first reached universities, software source code was freely passed around, and programmers expected to be paid for programming and not for the programs themselves. Then things changed as computers reached the business world, and companies began to develop and license software on a commercial basis, restricting access to the source code. In 1984, Richard Stallman, one of the original computer whiz-kids, questioned the commercial software companies' actions and started what he called the free software movement.
What could I do? I had no political party behind me. I couldn't expect to convince governments or corporations to change any of their policies. but I didn't know how to write software. So I said, I'm going to develop another operating system, and with the help of whoever will join in, and together we will make it free software. We will respect your freedom.
Richard Stallman came up with his own license for free software, which incorporated what he described as the 4 freedoms.
Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. Freedom 1, the freedom to help yourself. That's the freedom to study the source code and change it to do what you wish. Then there's freedom 2, the freedom to help your neighbor. That's the freedom to make copies and distribute them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to help your community. That's the freedom to publish or distribute a modified version when you wish. If you have all four of these essential freedoms, the program is free software. Free software. Free software.
The next development came in 1991. A 21-year-old Finnish computer programmer, Linus Torvalds, developed what is known as the kernel, the core of the operating system, and called it Linux. Its proponents boast it can operate as well on a mobile phone as on a supercomputer. And Torvalds' invention can be downloaded without paying anyone anything. According to the Linux Counter, a pro open source website, there are estimated to be up to 29 million computers using Linux. But since it is not sold, there are no sales figures on which to base data.
I haven't heard of FOSS at all.
No, I've never heard of FOSS.
I'm afraid I've no idea what FOSS is.
I have heard of free and open software.
No, never heard of FOSS.
No, I've never heard of FOSS. I don't know what it is.
I've never heard of FOSS. I do not know what was it?
Yes, I have heard of free and open source software, and I do have some of those products on my computer at the moment.
Free open source software may not be known by name, but indirectly, anyone who sends an email or uses the web is using open source all the time as the gears of the internet. Web servers, mail transports, and FTP servers are nearly all open source. Although Richard Stallman meant free as in freedom, not free as in no costs involved, it was misleading. Not everyone understood the concept. Especially, as we'll discover, open source can have significant costs down the line. In 1998, the Open Source Initiative, an organisation dedicated to promoting free and open source software, was founded by computer programmers Eric Raymond and Bruce Perens, who felt that the word free could be replaced by open, and that would avoid confusion.
Open source takes free software and promotes it to business people. When you say free, it doesn't mean freedom, it means cheap, and that didn't play too well to business people.
So by rebranding free software as open, Bruce Perens and his colleagues hoped that a new business model would emerge. And companies like Fortune 500 Computer Hardware and software developer Sun Microsystems are now making money by selling services instead of software.
What we're actually doing is we are selling our skill in producing the software that people have installed. So actually we're selling exactly the same thing we used to sell when we sold glossy boxes that people paid for at the point of selection.
But the proprietary software companies argue that customers want simpler solutions out of the box.
Most of the customers that I talk to are looking to reduce the amount of money they spend on services. They want software to be automated, to become more simple, to become less complex to run.
So does that mean free open source software is being hyped unjustifiably? Not necessarily, because if you live in a country with a huge potential pool of software engineers whose charges are modest, the lure of software that does not incur the cost of servicing is less obvious.
It's not 100% certain that open source is truly less expensive than proprietary software, but certainly initially it is. And a quick scan of the pricing of, say, Microsoft products versus Linux products, it's simple, it's no contest. Open source is much less expensive. For that reason, if we're going to bring the world online, the next 1 billion people, clearly it's going to take open source software, or certainly a different pricing strategy by the proprietary software vendors. There are 500 million people on the African continent under 25.
In sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, 98% of African schoolchildren go through their whole school education without ever seeing or touching a computer in the classroom. SchoolNet Namibia, set up in 1999 by a partnership of NGOs and the Ministry of Education, is a non-profit provider of internet, hardware and software to the nation's schools. It has a mission to ensure Namibians do not suffer from the handicap of being on the wrong side of the digital divide. SchoolNet is furnishing schools with specially designed computer labs equipped with donated computers. Often, the local arms of the proprietary companies will provide their software unlicensed or at reduced cost for good causes such as SchoolNet. Yet it chose open source software for the computers now in over 400 schools. Why?
In having an open source solution, the way we've put it into play at schools in Namibia, as part of a very standardized system, uniformly spread out across the country, we don't have viruses, we don't have people vandalizing or stealing software or whatever it is that is probably faced in quite a few first world environments.
SchoolNet claims that the accessibility of open source also means that trainees are able to learn how to refurbish computers, often with little or no knowledge of computing.
Most of these people, they are not satisfied. It's like when we get them, they are really totally illiterate from computers. Open source helped us because we are not satisfied, so it helped us to make sure that we develop ourselves.
Courtesy of wireless networking, schools are getting linked to the web. In the remote areas, solar provides the power. At the computing centre at HQ in the capital, Windhoek, school children queue for up to an hour after school to use the free access to computers and the internet. In Brazil, the pattern of usage in the home and in the private sector is little different from anywhere else in the globe. But the switch in the governmental sector is on an altogether bigger scale. A major company such as Intel has begun to adjust its strategy.
Intel's been very active in free and open source software, mainly driven by what our customer demand has been. We see this predominantly in the emerging geographies in areas like India, China, Brazil. Each of these have chosen positions around open source and education, and we've been working hard to optimize our platforms for specific solutions based on open source.
The Brazilian position on software, on free software, is very positive. The Brazilian government has created a program to support free software both inside the government as an application for governmental procedures, and also supporting free software as a tool, as an instrument for the society.
By adopting open source, or software libre as it's known in Brazil, the National Institute for Information Technology claims it's made a saving of around $150 million a year in license fees. And according to Gilberto Gil, this saving has been translated into more hardware reaching many previously technologically impoverished areas. There is even a government mandate now in Brazil that states that free open source software must be the software of preference by all administrative bodies. Microsoft announced the launch recently in Brazil of a simpler to operate and cheaper version of Windows XP. Is this because it's fearful that Brazil will set a very costly, for Microsoft, trend?
Brazil is a very important country in the world. We actually have a very focused strategy within our company around what we call the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And all of those are countries that have a wide diversity of needs. There's a very poor population in Brazil that needs access to technology, that needs to be able to get skills training to become part of the growing economy, to get that first rung on the ladder. And we're very active in Brazil, working in the education sector, partnering with the government, partnering with the NGO community to make sure that that access is available. We've invested $13 million in just the last few years to provide access to technology in Brazil.
But this hasn't stopped FOSS gaining a significant presence in Brazil. Projects include Paraná State's $200 million World Bank-supported project that aims to provide computing infrastructure as well as delivering software content and support tools to 2,100 public schools. 40,000 computers have recently been delivered to distribution centres destined for the new school computer labs that will be running a specially developed web portal which gives access to learning tools through a two-way gateway, where teachers log in and contribute to the pool of educational resources, so software isn't the only thing that's being shared.
I think the freedom is the most important thing, because you can make some modifications, and any person can use these modifications. So we live today in a kind of society which the knowledge is for everybody, and not for little groups who have money to pay for the information.
In other parts of the globe, the doors to the world of information technology are being opened in a different way. South Africa's President Mbeki is famous for his addiction to the internet. He wants the country to follow suit, with the government pushing the adoption of the digital revolution. Even an entire television series has been devoted to open source software, and the government-funded Maraka Institute has spawned many open source projects, including the Digital Doorway, which its proponents say is a virtually indestructible computing hub, which follows the "if you build it, they will come" philosophy.
In India, there was the idea of a hole-in-the-wall project where a computer would be put where people could access it kind of off the wall. It's just sitting there and it peeps through the wall. And the idea is to promote the concept of minimally invasive education. That has inspired South Africa's Digital Doorway project, and it has now been rolled out across 21 sites. It's a way of making it easy for people to teach themselves at their own pace, again, according to their own style, how to use and to innovate through information and communication technologies.
The Digital Doorway is loaded with open source software, learning resources, an open source encyclopedia, digital books, graphic packages, and educational games. This computing kiosk, equipped with 4 protected screens and waterproof keyboards, not only provides access, but its supporters say quickly demystifies and makes accessible technology.
Well, in many of the communities, you'll find that most of the community has not even discovered how a computer works. Very few actually in the very poor areas have access even to an ATM, let alone a computer that they can use. So for some of these places, this is actually the first experience any of the children especially have had with a computer, and so it's both an exciting opportunity for them to discover something new, and also we find that in the long run they'll be learning about something that they're going to be using probably in jobs and in the workplace in the future, so it is a real benefit to them.
Projects like the Digital Doorway may be a step forward for the technologically impoverished communities, but on the job front, especially in developed countries, commercial software is still much more prevalent in people's minds.
I think you should have knowledge of Word, Excel.
Word, Outlook.
Microsoft Word and Excel.
Explorer seems to be the most common.
iMovie.
I use Microsoft Word more than anything else.
Definitely useful to have a knowledge of Word and Excel.
I think it's important that anybody has an understanding of that software, because it's really the de facto software in the workplace nowadays.
Frankly, that's really the only one that I know.
But that doesn't mean some of the big hitters are dismissing FOSS as software for the geeks.
HP's position is very simple, that we give the customer a choice. If the customer wants to use proprietary software, we are very happy to give him that. And if the customer wants to use open source software, we give him that. And we work with the open source community in a very big way.
In February 2005, computer giant IBM announced plans to invest $100 million in its support of open source software.
Our commitment has increased to open source software. We're involved in over 150 open source projects. In our Linux Technology Centre, we've got over 700 programmers and engineers working on open source projects as part of the open source community. But I think the main reason that our commitment to open source has increased is our customers have been asking for it because they see the value in it.
And even though the majority of computers in the United Nations aren't running FOSS, the UN Joint Inspection Unit highly recommends its use.
One of the recommendations we are making precisely is to ensure that all organizations in the UN system will come up with a organization-wide policy on using open source software.
This is no ordinary school bus in India. This bus's seats are equipped with a computer terminal, and the ticket collector has been replaced by a technologically literate teacher. This is the Mobile Bus Project in the Baramati district of central India, where scarce resources are being made to go further than ever before. The scheme is funded by the World Bank and the Vidya Pratishan's Institute of Information Technology, located in Baramati. The school children wait eagerly for the bus's arrival. The fleet of 5 buses travel to around 35 villages each week, are fully equipped with 24 computer terminals running free open source software, which the Institute says was chosen because of initial cost savings.
In India, basically, if we want to run the projects like mobile computer lab or giving computer education to rural school children, the basic constraint is a finance. And in order to get this, definitely we should find out how to reduce the cost of the project. And as the open source is the best solution to reduce the cost of the software, so we decided to go for open source platform.
The mobile teachers are able to teach computing skills to 6,000 10 to 14-year-old pupils. The mobile bus curriculum teaches everything from the basics of computing to how to use various kinds of software and even programming skills, and it appears that this access is having even wider benefits.
Apart from this computer education, their general knowledge has increased, their subject knowledge has increased, interest gets generated so that they have started coming to schools.
By being used in programs like this, proponents of FOSS say this is how it will help bridge the digital divide. Advocates of open source software as a boon for developing countries also contend it is highly flexible and sometimes best suited to help cope with large-scale issues like disasters. Natural disasters like the tsunami leave a massive scale of devastation in a very short space of time, swiftly wiping out transport, communications and emergency services infrastructures, and even the richest nations are surprisingly left in a state of chaos. Over 30,000 people died and nearly 1 million people were affected by the tsunami in Sri Lanka, and help and aid poured in from around the globe in the form of donations, food, clothes, money and people. All of this had to be coordinated in order that help effectively reached those who needed it most. And this needed to be done in an infrastructure that had received very little in terms of investment prior to the disaster. A vital part of disaster management is information. Who has been affected, where the people are, who needs help, and by accurately managing information using information technology, data can be processed, enabling families and next of kin to find each other and resources to be distributed to those who need them most.
The morning of the 26th of December was a terrible day for us because all of a sudden the whole of Sri Lanka faced something that had never been the situation in Sri Lanka. We had losses of people who were not traceable, people who were injured, and of course for every one person there was a whole family back at home looking for them and trying to find information.
Looking at the urgent needs that had been created following the tsunami, the Sahana disaster management system was developed by a team of over 80 Sri Lankan programmers using free and open source software.
After the tsunami, a group of volunteers from the IT industry, really the free and open source community, got together and built a solution and a suite of web-based disaster management applications. They looked at the problems affecting their fellow countrymen and all the chaos, and they'd identify those problems and build solutions around them.
FOSS worked for the improvised Sahana because the volunteer computer